Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our virtual classroom. Today, we're going to be going to continue. We're going to be continuing with multiplying fractions, but today I want to cover specifically what it looks like to multiply mixed numbers and improper fractions. Again, we will be covering how to multiply mixed numbers and improper fractions, which really begs the question. What is a mixed number? What is an improper fraction? And to answer that question, I want to go back to a previous lesson where we talked about multiplying proper fractions. When we're multiplying proper fractions, we're talking about multiplying fractions like that look like this, where the numerator, the top number, is less than the denominator. All right, so the numerator, the top number, is less than the denominator, meaning that this fraction, 3/4, represents something that is less than one whole. We don't have enough to make a whole. If something is written as 3/4, I would need 4/4 to make a whole. So I have 3/4, so it is less than enough to make a whole, right? And so if I was multiplying something like 3/4 times 2/3, remember that when multiplying fractions, you go straight across. So numerator with numerator, denominator with denominator, and then whatever you get, so 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 3 is 12. You just have to make sure to simplify that, and that would give you your final answer. There's also a second method that I'm not going to go into much detail right now, but I just want you to get that, right? We multiply the numerators and we multiply the denominator. That's how you multiply proper fractions. But what if you have an improper fraction? Let's suppose you have something like 4/3 or 7/2 or 10/7 or something. Notice that in an improper fraction, the numerator is greater than the denominator. The top number is greater than the bottom number, signifying that you have more than enough to make a whole. Anytime you have an improper fraction, you have something that is greater than one whole. For example, here, or let's use this other example, 7/2. When I have 7/2, I only need 2 parts to make a whole. I have 7 of them. That's more than enough to make several wholes. Okay, more than enough to make several full things, if you will. Again, more than enough to make several whole things. That's why it's an improper fraction. Okay, you have more than just a part of something. So with that in mind, before we even talk about multiplying improper fractions and mixed numbers, I want you to realize that an improper fraction and a mixed number like 3 1/2 are actually two ways of writing the same thing. You can express an improper fraction as a mixed number. Okay, but when you're writing a mixed number, you're showing how many wholes you can make with that improper fraction and what part you have left over. All right, for example, in fact, this is a true statement, and 7/2 is the same thing as 3 1/2. Let me start with 3 1/2. 3 1/2. Because, ladies and gentlemen, to change a mixed number into an improper fraction, we're going to use a method known as the Texas two-step. So this is going to be known as the Texas two-step. Two-step. All you have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, to change a mixed number into an improper fraction is that you live in the great state of Texas. All right, so where do we live in? We live in Texas. Why Texas? Well, because when you have a mixed number, all you have to do is write the letters T and X, and that's going to show you what to do. You're like, well, what do you mean? Well, T reminds me of addition and X reminds me of multiplication. And we know that we always multiply first. So when I write TX, that's addition and multiplication, I'm going to first multiply the denominator and the whole number. So we multiply first. So I'm going to multiply 2 times 3, and that gives me 6, right? And once I do that, now I just need to add whatever answer I got with the numerator. So 2 times 3 gives me 6, and now 6 plus 1 gives me 7. So that's going to be my new numerator, and you keep the same denominator, halves. So 3 and 1/2 is the same thing as 7/2. 3 and 1/2 is the same thing as 7/2. Now let me do that again. Let me do it a little faster now. So again, if I start off with 3 and 1/2, if I start off with 3 and 1/2, remember, all you need to remember is that we live in Texas. So I'm going to write TX, addition, multiplication. Having done that, ladies and gentlemen, I have to multiply first. So that's going to be 3 times 2, which is 6, and then add the numerator. So 6 plus 1 is going to give me 7, and we keep the same denominator, 7/2. So ladies and gentlemen, 3 and 1/2 is actually the exact same thing as 7/2. They're the exact same thing. All right, well, what if we have an improper fraction like 7/2 and we want to go into a mixed number? How can I go the other way around? Well, in that case, we just need to remember something that is fundamental in math, and that is that fraction always means division. You do need to know that. That fraction is the same thing as a division problem. Division. What do I mean by that? Well, consider 7/2. 7/2. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you ever realized, but whenever you're looking at a division symbol, like the one that we have right here, sorry, at a fraction bar, like the one that I have here, it actually resembles the division symbol. And that's because the division symbol literally represents a fraction. That's where we get the division symbol from. So fraction means division. Again, fraction means division. So 7/2 literally means 7 divided by 2. 7 divided by 2. Now you might think, well, what if I mess that up? It's not, it's pretty easy to remember if you just remember In-N-Out burgers. I don't know if you ever had In-N-Out, but if you can remember In-N-Out burgers, it's just in and out. So the numerator goes inside the division box. So in this case, 7 would go inside the division box, and the denominator, in this case 2, will go on the outside. In-N-Out burgers. And then we just have to solve that division problem. 2 can go into 7 3 whole times. Notice where we get the 3. 2 times 3 is 6. We have a remainder of 1. And I can stop right there. So we have 3 wholes. That's going to be my whole number, just like we have a whole number right here, 3 wholes. And we have the same denominator of 2. So I'm going to keep the 2 in the bottom. And my remainder is my numerator. So that would be 3 and 1/2. That's a 2, actually. 3 and 1/2. Wait, isn't that the exact same thing that I have up here? Yes, because again, to go from a mixed number to an improper fraction, ladies and gentlemen, we use the Texas two-step. We multiply and then we add. That gives us our numerator, same denominator. And then to go from an improper fraction back to a mixed number, we just divide in over out. So in, the 7 goes in, the 2 goes on the outside. We divide. The whole number is our answer. The remainder is the numerator. The denominator stays the same, 3 and 1/2. So I hope that that was easy to understand, because now that we know that, ladies and gentlemen, when we are multiplying and we are dealing with mixed numbers, you need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that you absolutely cannot multiply mixed numbers. All right. We cannot multiply with mixed numbers. All right, so what do? Do we just leave it as it is? No, we cannot multiply mixed numbers, but we can multiply with improper fractions, meaning that we must change the mixed number into an improper fraction. Okay, so again, if you have mixed numbers, if you're multiplying them, you cannot multiply them, but we can change them into improper fractions by using the Texas two-step, and then we can actually multiply, just like we multiplied before, numerator with numerator, denominator with denominator. And we can simplify as we go. For example, let's say that we have 3 and 1/8. That's the example that I have right here. 3 and 1/8 times 3 and 1/5. 3 and 1/8 times 3 and 1/5. All right, again, they're mixed numbers. I cannot multiply them together. I first have to change those to improper fractions using the Texas two-step. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to do Texas on both of them. Texas on both of them. All right, and remember, when I'm doing the Texas two-step, I am going to multiply first. So in this case, we're going to do 8 times 3. All right, and let me use something more colorful. So 8 times 3, which is equal to 24, plus 1, which is going to give me 25. That's where this 25 came from. We keep the same denominator of 8, right? And then over here, I'm going to do 5 times 3, which is 15 plus 1. That's going to give me 16. And then I keep the same denominator of 5. And that's where these numbers came from. So 25/8 times 16/5. Now, please remember that 25/8 is the same thing as 3 1/8, and 16/5 is the same thing as 3 1/5. But now those are just now the mixed numbers expressed as improper fractions. Okay, so then what do? You just multiply them out. You just multiply them out the same way that we learned recently. So I just multiply numerator times numerator and denominator times denominator. Okay, if I do that, ladies and gentlemen, 25 times 16, obviously that gives me 400, right? I know you were able to do that off the top of your head, right? And then 8 times 5 is 40. Okay, so I have 400 over 40. Is that simplified? No, it's not. It is not in simplest form. So then I have to divide, which this isn't really that hard of a problem. Some of you guys looking at this know that this has to equal 10, but before we do that, let's apply the second method. Let me show you why the second method is so important. Because most of us wouldn't have known that 25 times 16 is 400. We'd have to work that out and potentially make a mistake, and then the whole thing is wrong. Instead, let's apply the second method, remembering that 25, guys, 25 is actually the same thing as 5 times 5. And 16 is actually the same thing as 8 times 2. Now, if you remember the second method, it just states that if you have the same number in the numerator and in the denominator, you can cancel them out. So notice that we have a 5 on the denominator and we have 2 5s on the numerator. So I'm going to cancel one of those out. So I'm going to cancel one of those out. And not only that, but we have an 8 on the numerator and an 8 on the denominator. So I'm going to cancel those out. And the question then becomes, what do I have left over? Well, on the numerator, I have a 5 and a 2. So 5 times 2 is equal to 10. And on the denominators, remember when you cross it out, it's actually a 1 now. So just 1 times 1, which is 1. So that's just 10 over 1. So the answer is 10. That is my final answer. Main thing to remember, guys, from this is that you cannot multiply mixed numbers. We must change the mixed number into an improper fraction following the Texas two-step. Once you do that, you just multiply through the same way that we learned recently. If your answer is an improper fraction, we must change it back into a mixed number using division. And if you need to review that, I recommend you watch the beginning of the video again. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for today, and I will see you next time.